Socrates was born around the year 470 before the Common Era in the ancient city of Athens, a place that would become known as the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and Western intellectual civilization. But at the time of his birth, Athens was not yet the symbol of philosophical greatness it would later become. It was a city of craftsmen, soldiers, politicians, and ordinary citizens trying to survive in a world shaped by war, instability, and constant political change. Socrates was not born into wealth or political power. His father, Socrates, was a stonemason, a man who worked with his hands, shaping stone into useful forms. His mother, Phaenarete, was a midwife, a woman who helped bring new life into the world. These two influences, shaping stone and helping birth new life, would later become powerful metaphors for Socrates' own method. He would describe himself not as someone who created knowledge, but as someone who helped others give birth to knowledge already inside them. As a young man, Socrates lived a simple life. He did not pursue wealth, and he did not seek political office, even though Athens offered those opportunities to its citizens. Instead, he became fascinated with a question that most people never stop to consider. What does it mean to live a good life? This question seems simple on the surface, but Socrates understood that it contains immense depth. Most people believed they already knew the answer. They believed that success, reputation, and material comfort defined a good life. But Socrates suspected that many people lived without truly understanding themselves. Athens during this time was a powerful and confident city. It had defeated the Persian Empire in war and had developed a system of democracy in which citizens could participate in political decision-making. Public speaking was highly valued. Sophists, professional teachers, traveled the city teaching young men how to argue, persuade, and win debates. They promised success through rhetorical skill. But Socrates saw a danger in this. He believed that persuasion without truth was dangerous. A person could become skilled at convincing others of something false. He believed that wisdom was not the ability to win arguments, but the ability to discover truth. Unlike the sophists, Socrates never charged money for teaching. He did not establish a school. He did not write books. Instead, he spent his days walking through the streets of Athens, entering marketplaces, gymnasiums, and public gatherings. He approached people and began conversations. He asked questions that seemed simple at first. What is courage? What is justice? What is virtue? What is knowledge? People often answered confidently, believing they understood these concepts. But Socrates continued asking deeper questions, exposing contradictions in their answers. Slowly, the person would realize that they did not understand the concept as clearly as they believed. This method became known as the Socratic method. It was not designed to humiliate people, but to awaken them. Socrates believed that true wisdom begins with recognizing one's own ignorance. He famously said that he was wiser than other men only because he knew that he did not know. This statement reflects a profound insight. Most people move through life assuming certainty. They rarely question their own beliefs. Socrates believed that this unexamined life leads to shallow existence. He believed that self-examination was essential to living well. Physically, Socrates did not appear impressive. Historical accounts describe him as having an unusual appearance, short, stocky, with a broad nose and prominent eyes. He did not dress in expensive clothing. He often walked barefoot, even in cold weather. He did not care about physical comfort or social status. What mattered to him was the condition of the soul. He believed that the soul, not the body, was the true center of human existence. While the body eventually weakens and dies, the soul reflects a person's character, their values, their truthfulness. He served as a soldier during the Peloponnesian War, a long and brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta. In battle, Socrates demonstrated remarkable courage and endurance. He remained calm under pressure. He protected fellow soldiers. His bravery showed that his philosophy was not simply abstract thought. He lived according to his principles, even in dangerous situations. After the war, Athens entered a period of political instability. democracy weakened. Tyrannical rulers briefly took control. Citizens became suspicious of those who challenged traditional beliefs. Socrates continued his questioning during this tense period. He questioned politicians, poets, craftsmen, and anyone willing to engage in conversation. He revealed that many who claimed knowledge were actually operating on assumption and imitation. This made him both respected and resented. Some young men admired him deeply. They followed him, listened to him, and adopted his method of questioning. Among them was Plato, who would later become one of the most important philosophers in history and preserve Socrates' teachings in written form. Without Plato, the world might never have known Socrates' thoughts. But others saw Socrates as dangerous. He did not provide comforting answers. He disrupted certainty. He exposed ignorance in those who held power and influence. He did not flatter authority. He forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Socrates believed that the greatest human responsibility was care of the soul. This did not mean religious ritual alone. It meant living with honesty, integrity, and self-awareness. He believed that wrongdoing harms the person who commits it more than the person who suffers from it. When a person acts unjustly, they damage their own soul. He rejected the idea that external success defines human worth. Wealth, reputation, and power are temporary. They do not guarantee wisdom or goodness. A person could possess all these things and still live a shallow life. True fulfillment, according to Socrates, comes from inner harmony, from aligning actions with truth. He also believed that knowledge and virtue are connected. A person who truly understands what is good will naturally act accordingly. Evil actions arise from ignorance, from misunderstanding what is truly beneficial. Socrates did not separate philosophy from daily life. For him, philosophy was not a profession. It was a way of existing. Every conversation was an opportunity to move closer to truth. Every moment was an opportunity to examine oneself. But this commitment to truth would eventually bring him into direct conflict with the society he lived in. His questions did not merely explore ideas. They exposed the fragile foundations upon which society built its confidence. And Athens, the city that had given birth to philosophy, would soon turn against the man who practiced it most honestly. As Socrates grew older, his presence in Athens became impossible to ignore. He was no longer simply a curious man asking questions in marketplaces. He had become a public figure, known across the city as someone who challenged assumptions, exposed false confidence, and refused to accept easy answers. His conversations were not aggressive, but they were relentless. He would approach politicians who claimed to understand justice and ask them to define it. He would question poets about the meaning of their own work. He would speak with craftsmen who possessed technical skill, but assumed this skill made them wise in all areas of life. Again and again, the same pattern emerged. People believed they understood fundamental concepts, but when questioned carefully, their certainty collapsed. This created a silent tension between Socrates and Athenian society. Athens was proud of its democracy, proud of its intellectual culture, proud of its achievements. But Socrates was revealing something uncomfortable. He was showing that beneath this confidence, many people lived without true self-knowledge. They repeated beliefs inherited from tradition without examining them. They defended ideas not because they were true, but because they were familiar. Socrates believed that this lack of self-examination was dangerous, not only for individuals, but for society as a whole. A democracy depends on citizens who can think clearly and act wisely. If citizens act based on ignorance, fear, or unexamined belief, the entire system becomes unstable. He believed that his role was necessary, even if it made people uncomfortable. He compared himself to a gadfly, a small insect that irritates a large horse, forcing it to remain awake and alert. Athens, in his view, was the horse, powerful but capable of falling into intellectual sleep. His questioning was meant to keep it awake. One of the most important influences on Socrates' life was the Oracle of Delphi. According to historical accounts preserved by Plato, A friend of Socrates asked the oracle whether anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle responded that no one was wiser. When Socrates heard this, he was confused. He did not believe himself to be wise. He believed himself to be ignorant. To understand the oracle's meaning, he began questioning those who were widely considered wise: politicians, poets, teachers, and craftsmen. What he discovered was profound. These individuals possessed knowledge in specific areas, but they believed this knowledge made them wise in all areas. They did not recognize the limits of their understanding. Socrates realized that his own wisdom consisted in recognizing his ignorance. He did not pretend to know what he did not know. This intellectual humility became the foundation of his philosophy. He believed that most people fear ignorance and hide it behind confidence. But Socrates saw ignorance not as weakness, but as the starting point of wisdom. Only when a person recognizes their lack of knowledge can they begin to seek truth. Socrates also introduced a radical idea about the nature of human identity. He argued that the soul is more important than the body or external possessions. Most people focus their energy on improving their physical condition, gaining wealth, or increasing social status. But Socrates believed these pursuits were secondary. The true task of life was to care for the soul, to develop honesty, courage, justice, and wisdom. He believed that a damaged soul, corrupted by dishonesty or injustice, could not be healed by external success. A person might gain wealth or power, but if they lived without truth, their inner condition would remain broken. This emphasis on inner moral development was revolutionary. It shifted the focus of philosophy from the external world to the internal life of the individual. Socrates also challenged conventional ideas about happiness. Many Athenians believed happiness came from pleasure, comfort, and social recognition. But Socrates argued that true happiness comes from living in alignment with virtue. A person who lives honestly and justly possesses inner harmony. A person who lives dishonestly, even if they appear successful, lives in internal conflict. He believed that wrongdoing harms the person who commits it more than the person who suffers from it. This idea was difficult for many people to accept. Society often focuses on external consequences of wrongdoing, punishment, loss of reputation, or legal penalty. But Socrates believed the deeper damage occurs inside the individual. Injustice corrupts the soul. This belief explains why Socrates refused to compromise his philosophy, even when it made him unpopular. He believed that protecting his soul was more important than protecting his comfort or safety. During this time, Athens was recovering from the Peloponnesian War, a devastating conflict with Sparta that ended in Athenian defeat. The war had weakened Athens politically and emotionally. Many citizens felt anger, fear, and uncertainty. In this unstable environment, Socrates' questioning began to appear threatening. People associated intellectual questioning with political instability. Some of his former students, such as Alcibiades and Critias, had become involved in political betrayal and tyranny. Although Socrates himself had not participated in their actions, his association with them created suspicion. Gradually, public opinion began to turn against him. He was no longer seen only as a philosopher. He was seen as a destabilizing force. His method of questioning exposed ignorance in powerful individuals, damaging their pride. His refusal to conform made him difficult to control. His influence on young people made authorities nervous. He was not teaching them what to think. He was teaching them how to think, and that was far more dangerous. Socrates understood that his path carried risk, but he believed that abandoning philosophy would be a betrayal of his purpose. He believed that truth was more important than safety. He continued walking through Athens, continuing his conversations, continuing his questions. He knew that most people sought certainty, but he sought something deeper. He sought understanding. And soon, the city he had spent his life questioning would force him to answer for it. As the years passed, the tension between Socrates and the city of Athens reached a breaking point. He was now an old man, around 70 years of age, but he had not changed his way of life. He still walked through the streets, still spoke to anyone willing to listen, still asked questions that made people uncomfortable. He had no political position, no army, no wealth, and no written works. Yet his influence was immense, carried through the minds of those he had spoken to. His power did not come from authority. It came from his ability to awaken doubt and self-reflection in others. In 399 before the Common Era, formal charges were brought against him. The accusation was not that he had committed violence or theft. The accusation was far more abstract and far more dangerous. He was charged with corrupting the youth of Athens and with impiety, meaning he did not properly respect the gods of the city. These charges reflected fear rather than crime. The authorities believed that his questioning weakened traditional beliefs and encouraged young people to challenge authority. To understand the seriousness of this moment, it is important to understand how justice worked in Athens. There were no professional judges, as in modern courts. Instead, large juries made up of ordinary male citizens decided guilt and punishment. In Socrates' case, approximately 500 citizens formed the jury. His fate would be decided not by legal specialists, but by the same society he had spent his life questioning. Socrates was given the opportunity to defend himself. His defense was later recorded by his student Plato in a work known as the Apology. The word apology here does not mean saying sorry. It means a formal defense. In this defense, Socrates did not beg for mercy. He did not flatter the jury. He did not attempt to manipulate their emotions. Instead, he spoke honestly, explaining his life and his mission. He explained that he never claimed to be a teacher in the traditional sense. He did not give lectures or charge money. He simply asked questions. He explained the story of the Oracle of Delphi and how it led him to question those who believed themselves wise. He argued that he was performing a service to the city by encouraging citizens to examine themselves. He told the jury something that shocked them. He said that if they executed him, they would harm themselves more than they harmed him. He believed that his role was necessary for the intellectual and moral health of Athens. He refused to present himself as a victim. He refused to appeal to pity. He even refused to bring his family into the courtroom to beg for his life, which was a common practice at the time. He believed that decisions about justice should be based on truth, not emotion. At one point, he told the jury that he would rather die than abandon his philosophical mission. He explained that fear of death should not guide human action, because fear of death is based on ignorance. No one truly knows what happens after death. It could be nothing like a peaceful sleep without dreams, or it could be a continuation of existence in another form. Therefore, fearing death more than injustice makes no sense. This statement reflects one of Socrates' most profound beliefs. The greatest harm is not death. The greatest harm is living without truth and virtue. After hearing his defense, the jury voted. The result was close, but he was found guilty. According to Athenian law, after a guilty verdict, both the accuser and the accused could propose a punishment. The jury would then choose between them. The accusers proposed death. Socrates was expected to propose exile, which might have saved his life. Instead, he responded with calm irony. He said that rather than punishment, he deserved reward because he had spent his life serving the city by encouraging wisdom and self-examination. This response angered many jurors. They saw it as arrogance, not integrity. When the final vote was taken, the jury chose death. Socrates was sentenced to die by drinking hemlock, a poisonous plant that causes paralysis. After the trial, Socrates was placed in prison to await execution. During this time, his friends and students visited him. They were devastated. They offered to help him escape. They had arranged a plan. The prison guards could be bribed. He could flee Athens and live in exile. But Socrates refused. His refusal was not based on fear or resignation. It was based on principle. He believed that escaping would contradict everything he had taught. He had spent his life arguing that individuals must respect justice and moral responsibility. If he escaped, he would be placing his own survival above his commitment to law and truth. He also believed that death was not something to be feared. He had spent his life preparing for this moment by developing inner independence. His peace did not depend on external conditions. In prison, he remained calm. He continued discussing philosophy with his friends. He did not express regret or panic. He treated his final days as an extension of his lifelong mission. On the day of his execution, he was given the cup of hemlock. His friends surrounded him, overwhelmed with grief. But Socrates remained composed. He drank the poison without hesitation. As the poison spread through his body, paralysis slowly moved upward from his legs. He remained conscious, aware of what was happening. His final moments were calm, controlled, and peaceful. His death was not the result of violence or fear. It was the result of his commitment to truth. He had lived according to his principles, and he would die according to them. After Socrates drank the hemlock, his body slowly began to fail, but his mind remained clear until the very end. His friends, including Plato, who would later become one of the most important philosophers in human history, watched in silence as the man who had transformed their understanding of existence faced death without fear. According to the account preserved in Plato's dialogue known as the Phaedo, Socrates spent his final hours not in despair, but in calm philosophical reflection. He continued discussing the nature of the soul, the meaning of death, and the possibility that death was not an end, but a transition. He explained to his friends that true philosophers spend their lives preparing for death, not because they seek death, but because they seek freedom from illusion. He believed that the body, with its desires, fears, and distractions, often prevents the soul from seeing truth clearly. The senses provide incomplete and sometimes misleading information. People become attached to pleasure, comfort, and material concerns, and in doing so, they lose sight of deeper reality. Socrates believed that philosophy was a process of gradually separating the soul from these distractions, allowing it to move closer to truth and wisdom. As the poison moved upward through his body, his legs became heavy, then numb. The paralysis continued slowly, steadily. There was no sudden violence, no panic. His breathing remained calm. His mind remained calm. He had spent his entire life teaching that fear of death comes from ignorance, from assuming death is something terrible without knowing its true nature. Now, in this moment, he demonstrated that belief completely. His final words reflected his clarity of mind. He told his friend Crito that they owed a rooster to Asclepius, the Greek god associated with healing. This statement has been interpreted in many ways, but one of the most widely accepted interpretations is that Socrates saw death itself as a kind of healing, a release from the limitations of physical existence. Just as medicine heals the body, death, in his view, might free the soul. Soon after speaking these words, his breathing slowed and his body became still. Socrates, the man who had spent his life questioning others, had reached the end of his physical existence. But in another sense, his influence was only beginning. Socrates had never written anything down. Everything known about him comes from the writings of his students, especially Plato and Xenophon. Plato, who had been deeply shaped by Socrates' conversations, would go on to create a vast body of philosophical work. In these writings, Socrates appears as a central character, asking questions, challenging assumptions, guiding others toward deeper understanding. Through Plato's dialogues, Socrates' voice continued to speak long after his death. What made Socrates unique was not that he provided final answers. It was that he changed the nature of philosophy itself. Before Socrates, philosophers were primarily concerned with understanding the external world, the structure of matter, the nature of the universe, the forces of nature. Socrates shifted the focus inward. He asked questions about human life, morality, justice, knowledge, and the soul. He believed that understanding oneself was more important than understanding the stars. He introduced the idea that wisdom begins with intellectual humility. Recognizing one's own ignorance opens the path to genuine learning. This idea remains one of the foundations of philosophical thought. He also demonstrated that philosophy is not simply theoretical. It is practical. It shapes how a person lives. Socrates did not separate thought from action. He lived according to his beliefs, even when it cost him his life. He showed that integrity means remaining faithful to truth, regardless of consequences. His death had a powerful impact on Athens. Many citizens later regretted the decision to execute him. They realized that in silencing Socrates, they had silenced one of the few individuals truly dedicated to moral and intellectual clarity. But his influence could not be erased. Plato continued his work. Aristotle, Plato's student, would later expand philosophical inquiry even further. Through these thinkers, Socrates became the foundation of Western philosophy. His method of questioning remains one of the most powerful intellectual tools ever developed. It is still used in education, law, science, and critical thinking. The Socratic method teaches people not what to think, but how to think. It encourages careful examination of beliefs, awareness of assumptions, and openness to truth. Socrates also revealed something deeper about human existence. He showed that external success does not define a meaningful life. Wealth, power, and reputation are temporary. What endures is the condition of the soul. A person who lives with honesty, courage, and self-awareness achieves something more valuable than external achievement. He lived in poverty, without political authority, without written works. Yet his influence became greater than kings. He owned nothing, yet shaped the intellectual future of civilization. He did not seek followers, yet his ideas reached across thousands of years. He did not fear death, because he understood that the true measure of life is not its length, but its truth. Socrates spent his life awakening others, and in doing so, he awakened philosophy itself.